Well, this is Transfiguration Sunday. The scriptures show us not one, but two wondrous visions. First, Elisha's call is confirmed when he witnesses Elijah's departure into the clouds. Elisha saw his master taken up in a chariot of fire, led by flaming horses. And the second wondrous vision is Jesus' transfiguration. His appearance changed right before the eyes of the disciples as his ministry was affirmed by God. The wondrous events were seen by people. But Paul tells the church at Corinth that some things remain hidden, unseen by some. The gospel itself is hidden from some, but not from others. Paul said it is the lost people for whom the gospel remains hidden. And I've always had a tough time with that idea. I mean, why would God hide the gospel from anyone, especially the one who most needed to hear it? See, sometimes I fail to read the scripture in its defining context. I've always forgotten to read that next line, the one that says, "The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so they cannot see." It's important to read the whole story before you start to wrestle with what it means. It's not God who hides the saving truth, but his and our opponent. It's all a matter of vision. In 2 Kings, we learn that Elisha's mentor, and if I make it through the whole sermon without switching those two guys, it will be the third miracle of the day. We learn that Elisha's mentor, was to be taken from him. And Elijah wanted to spare his young friend that final moment of goodbye. And so he tried to leave Elisha behind. But the young man remained faithful. That may be my way of doing it. The young man remained faithful, and he would not leave his master's side. Elisha knew what was coming. He refused to acknowledge it, even when the prophets of the local communities told him that Elijah was about to leave. But he knew. And a second time, Elijah tries to separate himself gently from Elisha, but without success. The faithful younger man will not leave. And the two men continue on together. When they come to the Jordan River, Elijah struck the water with his cloak, and the waters parted. They were able to cross on dry land. And then Elijah asked, "What do you want from me? What will your inheritance be?" And Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit to be placed on him. And theologians sometimes argue that Elisha was pretty full of himself, pretty ambitious, a glory seeker, wanting to double the accomplishments of the great Elijah. But was it for his own glory that Elisha wanted a double portion of his master's spirit? And if the request was only for Elisha's glory, would God really grant it? We have to remember that Elisha has worked with and learned from Elijah for a long time. And when Elijah tried to send him away to spare him from his loss, Elisha remained faithful. He would not leave. Is this the act of a man who wants to upstage his teacher? I just don't think so. Elijah understood what Elisha was asking for, and he knew that it was a big gift and a big responsibility. If God allowed Elisha to see the departure, Elisha would know that his prayer had been granted. And so they walked on together. And suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and did what no man had been able to do. The chariot separated Elijah from Elisha. And Elisha saw his friend go up into heaven in a whirlwind, and he was gone. Elisha knew that his mentor was not coming back, but he also knew that he had received the gift he had requested. So Elisha walked back to the river carrying Elijah's cloak. And when he reached the river, he struck it with the cloak, and the waters parted as they had for Elijah. And he walked across on dry land. This confirmed for the local prophets who were watching that Elisha was indeed the next prophet. Sometimes the wondrous vision God sends is for the confirmation of one seeking to know whether they have truly been called. Elisha was confirmed by seeing Elijah go up into the clouds. Other times the vision is sent to affirm someone else's ministry. Elisha was able to part the waters, and this established him for the other prophets. Jesus was transfigured not for his own understanding, but so that the disciples would not truly understand who he was. Mark says, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John to the mountaintop. After 6 days. Well, what happened 6 days before, and is it important? It is. You see, 6 days before the Transfiguration, Jesus asked the disciples who people thought he was. Now, this was the easier of the two questions Jesus would ask that day. What does popular opinion say about me? And the disciples said, so long as I'm not committing myself to anything, here's what I'm hearing. Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you might be Elijah. Some prophet. And again, Jesus asked the question, this time more personally, who do you say that I am? And the voices fell silent. Finally, Peter stepped up and he said, you are the Messiah, the Holy One of God. That level of faith, that willingness to commit himself, led Peter 6 days later to the mountaintop. Jesus took his very innermost circle of disciples, James and John and Peter, to the top of a mountain where they could be alone. What was about to happen was not for everyone to see. As the 4 men gathered on the mountaintop, Jesus' face began to change. And I suspect the change was rapid as well as dramatic. The 4 friends standing together talking, when suddenly it was impossible not to notice that Jesus was different. His hair and clothing were dazzling white, and the 3 friends could not bear to look him in the face, and they noticed they were no longer alone. They recognized that Moses and Elijah stood with Jesus, talking with him as old friends, as they themselves had but a moment before. Now the disciples recognized all of this from the ground. They had been driven to their knees by the amazing sight. Once again, it's Peter who speaks when no one else dares. Lord, I am just so glad we are here to see this. I want to build 3 shrines right here on the mountaintop. People can come and worship God in shrines built for you and Moses and Elijah, and I get to stay up here in this glory for the rest of my life, and this is just going to be good. No sooner had Peter spoken than a voice rang out from the clouds, this is my son. I love him. Listen to him. What more confirmation could Peter need of his declaration of faith than to hear the voice of God say, this is my son? And God said, listen to him. The statement, listen to him, is as important as the statement, this is my son. You see, sometimes, a business owner will have a child come into the family business, and that child is entitled to the respect owed to his father simply because he's the son. But he's not necessarily entitled to authority. Another son comes into the family business with his father's endorsement. His father makes him a senior vice president. This son is entitled both to respect owed to the son of the business owner and the authority of one granted authority. His father has chosen him as a leader. Jesus is not only Son of God, but Son of God, chosen by God to speak for God. What must have been going through the minds of the disciples on that mountain as they knelt before Jesus, shielding their eyes from the radiance of his face? Do you suppose they heard and understood the words of encouragement Moses and Elijah had for Jesus? Pretty sure nobody on the mountain was wearing a name tag, so how did Peter know that those were Elijah and Moses standing there and not some other heroes of the faith? From a distance of 2,000 years, we have all kinds of questions. But in that moment, there were no questions, no doubts. God's revelation was, this was his son. Listen to him, obey him, follow him. God has this incredible way of answering the deepest needs and questions of our hearts. Elisha was about to take on the huge responsibility of leading the people Elijah once led. Elisha asked for a double portion of the spirit of the prophet, his wisdom, his discernment, and his faithfulness, so that he could lead well. He needed to know that God would lead him as he had Elijah. And God dramatically, resoundingly answered yes in a chariot of fire. When we get to the 9th chapter of Mark, Jesus has been teaching for quite a while. He's made some controversial statements and gotten in the face of the church. Jesus has told the disciples that he'll be killed. Now, Peter, James, and John believe that Jesus is Messiah, but they have this hero warrior image of what Messiah is. What is this stuff about Jesus has to die? They believe. They want to believe, but they have doubts. They need to know that this man that they may have to give their lives for is the one they've been waiting for. On that mountaintop, the voice of God rang out, "This is my son. Listen to him. Follow him. You're on the right track." And there was no more room for doubt. Paul wanted to be a faithful servant of God, and he believed that he was following God's will by hunting down Christians. He was going in the wrong direction for the right reason. He needed someone to knock him off his horse and turn him around. And God did that for Paul. God physically blinded Paul for a brief moment to show him the depths of his blindness. 17 years ago, I was talked in to go into a lay speaker school right back there in our fellowship hall. And I knew it was going to be a one-time deal. In my estimation, I didn't need or want further contact with lay speaking ministries because I would never go out to preach. See how smart I'm not? That was in March 2001. In May 2001, I took my first class toward becoming a commissioned lay speaker. In that 2-month period, God had spoken to me quietly, not even audibly, just planting the knowledge in me that this was something He wanted me to pursue. I needed to know that God had a plan, this plan for me, and He showed me. Now, I don't include my story with those of Peter and Elisha and Paul in any way to include myself in their number. I share my story to show you that God still answers the needs of our hearts, now as certainly as He did then. God has this amazing way of knowing just exactly what we need the most and then giving it to us in the least obvious of ways. It's perfectly okay to ask God for the things we need. In fact, He expects us to do that, but He already knows. Our prayers of petition just help us to get in practice to offer prayers of thanksgiving when we get the answers. So this week, I want you to ask yourselves, what is my deepest need and desire? What wondrous sight do I need to see to confirm that God has and will answer that need? I'd like for you to get that picture in your mind of the complete provision of your need and then expect it. God still works wondrous sights in and for and through His people. This is His promise. This is His word. Amen.